Greetings, I'm Mike Forster, President of CEMP Central and author of Construction Equipment Economics. It's been a pleasure for me to work with Caterpillar to assemble the material and present the fundamentals of equipment economics. It's a broad title and a complex subject, so let me take some time to share the thoughts that were going through my mind when I defined the overall structure and selected the topics we would cover. In the first instance, and at the highest level possible, I set out to develop a video-based training program with two objectives: to lower cost and to improve business performance. I believed this could be done by building expertise in two areas: equipment costing and lifecycle management. The concept of the two areas is critical and in many ways defines the structure of the whole program. Many companies and many programs focus on equipment costing, and many organizations are quite good at it, but that's only part of the story. The machines we use have a finite life, and I believe very strongly that you cannot manage equipment cost if you do not maintain a laser focus on economic life and life cycle management. So basic philosophy number one: in order to lower cost and improve business performance, you must manage cost and you must manage the full economic life cycle of the machines in your fleet. I've broken the material into 8 parts as shown on this slide. Each part is presented in a number of sessions, structured so that individuals taking the program can pause at the end of the session and take a break to collect their thoughts and discuss the material they've just covered. There are a total of 24 sessions, none of them longer than 20 minutes. Each session covers 1 or 2 topics to give a total of 40 topics. Let's have a look at how I've structured the parts, the sessions and the topics to achieve the final result. I trust you'll see there's some logic in the whole process. Part 1, management topics. I wanted to cover some broad management topics to open the program and start building our vocabulary. These are the 4 that I selected. 4 critical success factors: know your cost, maximize utilization, stop it from breaking, and manage age. These set the stage and give us a framework for summarizing the whole program at the end of part 8. 6 basic functions. I wanted to discuss the breadth of the equipment management function, and I wanted to define very clearly what your team needs to be good at in order to manage your fleet. Organization structure. I wanted to talk about how a company organizes itself in order to manage its fleet. I wanted to talk about the context between decentralized and centralized fleet management. And the last topic I chose was the flow of funds. There are many complex transactions that flow through the organization when it seeks to balance its books and recover the cost of owning and operating its fleet. Parts 2, 3, and 4. Here we lay the foundation of the program by developing a real understanding of owning and operating costs. Let's look at the topics covered in these 3 parts of the program. Part 2, owning and operating costs. 2 sessions and 4 topics. The definitions of owning and operating costs. Owning cost, the cost of bringing the machine into your fleet and keeping it there. Operating cost, the cost of turning the key and putting the machine to work. Characteristics, I outlined the characteristics of owning and operating cost, what made them similar, what made them different. And it's those differences which really built a lot of the material we cover in the program. In session 2, I spoke about the risks involved with the management of owning and operating cost, and I spoke about how to use those differences in the management of cost and in the management of life. In part 3, I focused very specifically on owning costs, the owning cost categories themselves, and then I looked at the administrative and finance costs of owning a fleet, at the depreciation and interest charges associated with owning a fleet, discussed the topic of residual market value in session 3, and in session 4, two very interesting topics: the gain or loss on sale and what happens to the owning cost per hour through the life of the machine. In part 4, I did a very similar operation for operating costs. Defined the operating cost categories, looked at the relatively constant operating cost categories such as tires and tracks, wear parts, and those sorts of things. Session 2, an in-depth focus on repair parts and labor, and an in-depth focus on the repair parts and labor curve to show that one can in fact use the data we collect to model the repair parts and labor curve and improve your ability to estimate the cost of repair parts and labor through the life of the machine. In session 3, a brief conversation on estimating operating costs from first principles, and then a conversation about what happened to operating costs per hour as the machine aged. Parts 5 and 6 is really where the rubber meets the road, because it's in part 5 that we take all the preceding material and use it to better understand the rate and the rate calculation, and to better understand the processes needed to manage cost. And in part 6, took the material from parts 2, 3, and 4 and used it to better understand economic life and to better understand the whole question of minimum life cycle cost. Let's have a look at how I did it. Session 1, conversation about why I have a rate. Who uses the rate in the organization? I try to show that the rate, or the standard cost of owning and operating a machine, affects and influences many, many parts of the organization. Second part of session 1, calculating a rate. The complexities of calculating a rate and how important our early assumptions on the ownership period and the usage are in the rate calculation. Session 2 outlines some cost control principles by going through a cost control cycle, and then use those principles and our detailed knowledge of owning and operating costs to unscramble the equipment account, to produce actionable information that would help you understand and unscramble the equipment account when things don't go exactly as they should. Session 3, I spoke about the impact of utilization as a very special risk, and then about how the risk of a utilization is shared in the job charging process, a complex and difficult topic. Part 6, I took the material covered in topics 2, 3, and 4 and applied it to economic life and minimum life cycle cost. Again, 3 sessions, 5 topics. In session 1, I went into detail on what was meant by economic life and minimum life cycle cost and discussed the key variables. Session 2, a little bit esoteric, a conversation about the cumulative cost model and how it differed from the classic minimum cost model, but then became very practical to discuss the churn chart as a high-impact graphic that helps you better manage the age of your fleet. And then in session 3, we looked at the very complex repair, build, replace decisions. This is where we used the cumulative cost model to better understand the Challenger Defender replacement decision and to better understand the complexities of the rebuild decision. With parts 7 and 8, I tried to wrap things up a little and create some conclusions to the preceding work. In part 7, I focused very specifically on reliability. It's an important subject and it doesn't get enough exposure in all conversations relating to equipment economics. And in part 8, I try to stress the fundamentals and bring some of the previous conversations on the subject together. So in part 7 on reliability, I spoke about the importance of inspection and prevention and the impact that they have on reliability. I spoke about the difference between reliability and availability, where I define reliability as the frequency of a down event and availability as the duration, the aggregate duration of those down events. Session 2, I spoke about the bathtub curve and about how a wear-out failure in the end defines the life of the machine. And I then spoke about some data, some KPIs, and some graphics pertaining to reliability, how we measure it, and how we understand it. And then in session 3, my favorite topic, the relationship between the age of a machine, the cost of a machine, and the reliability of a machine. In part 8, I looked at the fundamentals and tried to wrap things up. In session 1, I tried to understand stakeholder needs and went back to our conversation about organization. And I said that there are many people in an organization who are stakeholders in the management of the fleet. I try to define the quantitative tools that each of these stakeholders might need to better perform their job and to better support the whole question of fleet management. In session 2, I spoke about how we move the needle, how we reduce the costs, and in fact, the second part of session 2, I spoke very specifically about how cost is a symptom, but not the problem itself, and how we need to find and attack the causes of cost and use all our abilities to find and attack the causes of cost and finally reduce cost and improve performance. So as I did with all the sessions, one slide to remember. And the slide I'd like you to remember probably sums up more of the content of the program than any other slide, is this one, where I say you need to be proactive when it comes to managing utilization, because that's how you attack the causes of overruns in the owning cost side of the house. You need to be proactive when it comes to measuring and managing reliability, because that's how you attack possible cost overruns in the operating side of the house. You also need to be proactive when it comes to managing the age of your fleet, because that's how you oversee and look at and attack the causes of cost in all aspects of equipment fleet management. So there we have it, wrapped up. The Fundamentals of Equipment Economics, a video-based training program designed to lower cost and improve business performance to clear objectives by building expertise in equipment costing and lifecycle management, two very clear and two very different ways in which I believe you can lower cost and improve business performance. So thank you. I hope that gave you a good overview of the contents, the philosophy behind, and the structure of our program on the fundamentals of equipment economics.